Astrology is the myths of the stars and planets, telling the themes and plots of our lives. These stories come to us daily through our satellite, the Moon. She is constantly spinning astro news. Hi, I'm Merrylin Leblanc with Moonwise. This evening at 7:54 p.m. Mountain Time, the sun moves into the sign of Libra, marking the Autumnal Equinox. Today, we're talking about this event and the feminine principle or night energy it represents. Joining me is Daniel Fiverson. Welcome back to Moonwise, Daniel.
Thank you, Merrylin. It's always a great pleasure to be here.
And same on my part for you. Daniel, every year we have two equinoxes, one at the beginning of spring and one at the beginning of fall. Both times of equal day and night. Astrologically, how do you see these as different?
Well, we could start just with the rulerships. One is a very Martian energy, the other is a very Venusian energy. Though they're both very young, they do have that in common. It's energy moving outward from the center. It's a projection, if you would. And at the Aries ingress, when we move into the spring, we have all the energy, bounding out of, resounding out of the earth again after a long winter. And at the equinox, at the fall, autumnal equinox, we have the harvest, and we have the energy beginning to withdraw back into the earth to rest again through the winter. But they both represent a point of equilibrium, as you said, where we have equal night and day. But the difference is the light increasing or decreasing? And here we have the light beginning to increase again as we move decrease again as we move through the winter.
Which is that Venusian energy in terms of the kind of, and Jason Hawley has been joining me on Moonwise talking about day and night. And looking at this, we're going into darkness. It's sort of like going into night at the fall equinox.
Right.
So there's this kind of energy that brings up more the other worlds. It's not the well-defined, out there, rational world. It's more the world that we find by going inward. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the fall equinox, and the planet Venus is said to be the ruler of Libra, she's one of the planets we definitely think of as a feminine energy.
Right.
How do you see the feminine, is what I'm getting at?
Well, this is her outward expression. Venus rules two signs. She rules Taurus and the second house, and she rules Libra in the seventh house. And Venus, Aphrodite, she's the goddess of sensuality, of desire, and of relationship. And so there are two relationships here. In her rulership of Taurus, she's our relationship with ourself. In her rulership of Libra, she's our relationship with everybody else. But there is a direct correlation between the two, because it is our relationship with ourself, that Taurian energy, that we project out into our relationship with everyone else. Venus in Taurus, the Taurus energy is very much concerned with what's essential to us, where our priorities, where are our values, what's essential for our survival. And that Venus is magnetism, and astrologically, Venus represents magnetism. She is our individual magnetic frequency. The values and priorities that we have become emotionally charged, and that literally sets up a magnetic field around us. And that magnetic field is what is projected outward from us at all times. And it really emits through the seventh house. And it's who we attract and what we attract. It is the actual law of attraction. That magnetic frequency will draw in others. It draws us to be in relationship with others. It draws in our hopes, our fears, our obsessions, and our dreams.
Wow. Well, Venus right now is in the sign of Scorpio, one of Mars's signs. But also Scorpio, like Libra, is a relationship sign.
Right.
And so I would think that placement, of course, Venus is never that far from the sun. She's within 48 degrees of the sun. So it's, possible at the fall equinox that Venus could be in the sign of the end of Leo, Virgo, or into Scorpio, or even not so much not beyond Scorpio, because the equinox, the sun is at the beginning of Libra. But having her in Scorpio, how does that add to what you were saying about, what we attract?
Well, I think it intensifies it because Scorpio is going to bring us direct emotional experiences that will really push us to the edge of who we are. And Scorpio is an inward and very inward journey, if you would. It's down into our own personal underworld. Interestingly enough, we're going to have a Venus retrograde through this season. We're about 3 weeks out. The retrograde Venus will go retrograde on October the 5th, and really through the middle of November.
In the sign of
in the sign of Scorpio, she's gonna move back into Libra very briefly, but she will be mostly in Scorpio, and so she's gonna span this whole season. We have to remember that the equinox chart is kind of like a new moon chart. These are the energies that will be active throughout the season until we come up to the next solstice. So this Venus retrograde energy is really going to flavor. Venus and Scorpio retrograde is really going to flavor this long transit and this long period of time. What it's really going to facilitate is that we're really going to be looking at the values and priorities and really what's important to us. We're going to have a review course in really what's important.
I would say, adding to that too, it's the values we share with other people because of Scorpio. And when you look at the fact that this is going to be happening as we approach the November elections,
right.
Not that the equinox is that political, but in fact, given we're talking about the whole season, and with Venus retrograde in the sign that has a lot to do with transformations, with changes, major changes going on.
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of people recognizing that the choice they made in 2016 was not the right choice, and the priorities that they had were not the right priorities. Venus is also squaring the nodes in this chart at the equinox, and in evolutionary astrology, when a planet squares the nodes, it's what's called a skip step, where really that dynamic is really been incomplete. It's bounced back and forth between the past and what we're intending for the future, without really landing in either one, and resolving it. So we're really in that betwixt and between place of the choices that we made and the choices that we have to make, and resolving that dilemma of really what is it that we need. And the nodes are Aquarius and Leo. So the choices are about what is it that, how are we balancing Libra's balance? How are we balancing what I need, what we need, with what the collective needs, what's good for everybody, what's not. It's not just what's good for me. It's not just what's good for the few. It's what's good for all of us. And that is possible. It's not an impossible conundrum to find that place where our shared values are beneficial for everybody. So these are the energies that are swirling around us, and we're facing the calamities as a result of not having made these choices in the past.
Right. Well, and also the South Node is in the sign of Aquarius. Venus happens to be opposite Uranus too. There's what we call a grand square going on here.
Right.
That Uranus and Venus are opposite each other. The nodes are always opposite each other, and Uranus and Venus are squaring those nodes. And what we're talking about here, when I look at Venus and Uranus together, there's especially in an opposition kind of situation there's this a realization of the feminine that goes on and how the feminine can advance. There's many interpretations for other things, but in terms of this context, the Me Too movement is being brought up again, especially with the case of Kavanaugh being considered for the Supreme Court and the accusations that have been brought against him. Mm-hmm. That falls into this charts dynamic in many ways in terms of our own general consciousness. Do we want history to keep repeating itself and be in the same mess of how we treat women versus men in terms of behavior? I mean, all of that comes to play in this dynamic. It's been in Venus in Scorpio, the sign of sexuality. How is the sexuality of a woman being treated by the masses, by the rest of humanity?
There are also, I think, two other things to look at. We're still under the influence of the eclipses from over the summer. They will go on until February when we have our next eclipse season. And at the time of the eclipses, we had Pallas Athena conjunct the North Node, and we had Juno conjunct Uranus. And those are both very powerful feminine goddess energies. Take them one at a time. Pallas Athena was, from our mythology, was the most engaged with mortals of all the gods and goddesses. In the Iliad and the Odyssey, time after time, she directly contacted the heroes in the Iliad and especially in the Odyssey. She was always there for Ulysses, whenever he was, kind of lost at sea or emotionally, stranded on an island. She was able to relate to him what it is he needed to know to move along and finally, arrive home after his 10-year Odyssey. So she very much, I see Pallas Athena as the energy that informs us. There is a Uranus-Mercury aspect. It's been said that she actually is the transformational archetype between Mercury and Uranus. Lower mind, higher mind, left, etc. So she carries that intellect. She was born from Zeus's crown chakra. She's about strategy and wisdom. So all of these things, tell us that the messages are out there. If we are quiet, if we do any meditation, or we're able to actually, access, our own inner thoughts, we will hear her, and we will understand what it is that she's telling us. But even if we don't individually get it, we're getting it collectively, and it's coming out in the news, and it's coming out in the circumstances that are showing up. These circumstances are being generated. We saw the Women's March. We saw the outing by the two women from the New York Times of Harvey Weinstein. These are all very much Pallas Athena activist events, where the goddess is in the streets. She's no longer just in the sky.
And she's in Virgo right now, the sign of the complete woman, just really letting it come forth, connected very strongly to Venus, actually, in the equinox chart. Right, and so right. It's we're going to learn more and more about the feminine when it's rising, and there is nothing stopping that energy.
Right. If you're not seeing her, you're not looking. The other event through the eclipses was Juno and Uranus, and Juno, Hera, was all about fidelity. Her contract to Zeus. She was the queen of heaven. She was supposedly held equal power to Zeus. She never received equal power. She was always struggling to attain it, and often denigrated for having exercised it. She's full of wrath. She's full of vengeance, justifiably. But if we look at her astrologically, she's about the commitments and the agreements, the contracts that we have, not just in our intimate relationships, but with everybody. And Uranus is the disruptor and the interrupter. Uranus comes along and shakes things up. So what's happening is that our basic relational contracts and the agreements that we have, whether it's within our bedroom or it's within the halls of Congress, are all circumspect. Everything is not up for grabs, but everything's up for discussion. Everything is on the table. Because we need to resolve not all of it. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We're not going to break the contract, but we need to come back to the table and look at the contracts and look at the agreements we have as a collective, and really work this out so that we have the equity, we have the balance, we have the equilibrium that in Taurus that's going to serve the essential needs of everybody.
Right. She's at the end of Taurus. She's about to go into Gemini, another air sign like Libra. And so really, by degrees, she's in a very, what we call a trine, a very harmonious connection to the sun. And one of the things with Juno or Hera is that when she was angry, her wrath was felt very strongly. And I see this connection of Juno to the sun, the sun kind of representing the power and control, whether it's feminine or masculine at this time. But with Hera there, her wrath will be quite visible with the issues of how we treat the feminine and how we treat, and I don't mean just females in that sense, but the feminine. I mean, there are many men who are just as angry as women are by the treatment that has been coming out in the news over the past year or two, especially about the treatment of women in certain settings, et cetera. And this tells me that, this as this weekend continues into next week, that there's going to be some loud noise and repercussions, I imagine.
The voices will be raised with Sun conjunct Mercury. We're gonna hear about it.
You're listening to Moonwise here on KSFR. I'm Merrylin Leblanc with my guest Daniel Fiverson. We're talking about the fall equinox happening this evening, and we'll be back shortly after the Moon Minute. Welcome back to Moonwise. I'm Merrylin LeBlanc, and I want to remind you that you can always listen to this show and others on our website, KSFR, where we have our podcast. So if you didn't hear the whole show at the beginning, Daniel Fiverson and myself were talking about the fall equinox that begins this evening with the sun moving into the sign of Libra. You can go and listen to the beginning of the show and share it with your friends on ksfr.org. Daniel, to continue, we were talking a lot about the feminine energy, the asteroid goddesses, the planet Venus, that are very strong at this particular time. I know you may have some other asteroids that you want to bring in, because I'm noticing a couple that are also in strong relationship to the sun with this equinox. They're just a degree off, which is extremely close, and that's Vesta, and she's next to Saturn, and Hygeia. And what can you say about Vesta?
Yeah, we've got a T-square there. We've got a too strong an opposition of Chiron, which is exact, partile in astrological terms. They're at the same degree of zero. Just kind of talk about that for a sec. 0 degrees is total immersion into that archetype. It's like a palette of colors. If you were painting and you had red and yellow and blue on your palette, hadn't mixed them yet, it would be the pure color. And you can choose. It could be pure red, pure yellow, pure blue before it's become green or magenta or orange. So it's a very, very powerful saturation of the archetype. And it's squaring Vesta and Saturn, which are at 1 and 2 degrees. The Vesta Saturn is really interesting because, Saturn is authority. Saturn is the patriarchy. And here's Vesta, coming up to Saturn. Vesta is a really interesting goddess. There were no temples erected to Vesta. She was the hearth. She was not the fire, she was the hearth, the vessel that holds the sacred fire. And her place was in the center of every home and every community. So there were no temples to her. She was actually celebrated in the home itself. However, she was the first and the last, known as the first and the last, because she was the first eaten and the first disgorged by her father Saturn. So she is invoked at the beginning and end of every gathering, ceremonies, rituals. She held a very important place in Greek mythology, though there were no temples. We also hold her within our heart, and I kind of add an H at the end of that, inside the human hearth. The heart is also where we find her, because that is also the place of that sacred fire. So she represents spirit. She was totally committed to her sacred life. She was one of the virgin goddesses. We could spend a show talking about what it meant to be a virgin goddess, because they weren't virgins.